Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. Some background first. I'm a third-generation farmer, been working this land since I was old enough to walk behind my grandfather's tractor. We've got 300 acres that's been in the family for almost a century now. It's not just my job, it's my life, my heritage, everything I know. Most of it is cash crops like corn and soybeans, but we've also got some woodland with a creek running through it and good pasture land for the cattle. About 3 years ago, I made a huge investment that nearly broke the bank. I decided to transition a big section of the farm to certified organic crops. Anyone who knows farming will tell you this is expensive and risky. You have to keep the soil completely clean, no contamination, follow strict regulations, and wait years before you can even call it organic. But the payoff can be worth it if you do it right. Everything was going smooth until last spring when new neighbors moved in. The old Johnson place had been sold to some developer who built one of those fancy houses on a tiny 2-acre lot right on the border of my property. The house was positioned to have this sweeping view of my fields and the forest beyond. Real picture postcard stuff, I'll give them that. The new owners were a couple in their 40s. Let's call them Kevin and his wife. They were obvious city people who moved out here for what they called the rural aesthetic. You know the type. They want all the pretty views and Instagram-worthy sunsets, but none of the reality that comes with actual farm life. The trouble started about 3 weeks after they moved in. I was out checking on my new organic soybean seedlings near the property line when I spotted something that made my blood pressure spike. There was the wife, Kevin, their 2 massive unleashed dogs, and another couple having a full-blown picnic. They were a good 200 yards inside my property line, and those dogs were running wild, digging holes and trampling my delicate seedlings that I'd spent thousands of dollars on. I drove my ATV over there, gave them a friendly wave, and introduced myself. I explained as politely as I could that they were on private property and that the field they were camping in was part of a very sensitive organic crop project that I couldn't afford to have contaminated or damaged. The wife's response floored me. She waved her hand dismissively and told me not to be so stuffy. She said it wasn't like I was using all this land right now anyway, and they'd paid a premium for this view, so they intended to enjoy it. She actually said that a few little plants wouldn't hurt anything. Kevin just smirked and told me I needed to learn to share the nature. They made absolutely no effort to leash their dogs or pack up their stuff. I stood there for a minute, trying to process the sheer audacity, then told them again that this was private property and they needed to leave. The wife rolled her eyes and said they'd leave when they were done with their lunch. I went back to the house, called my lawyer, and asked what my options were. He told me to document everything and start with the basics, clear signage and boundaries. That weekend, I spent 2 full days installing brand new, private property, no trespassing signs all along the border with their place. Big, official-looking metal signs that nobody could miss. Within a week, half of them had been torn down and thrown in the ditch. The trespassing didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. I'd find them walking their dogs through my fields almost daily, jogging on the dirt roads I use for farm equipment, and even flying a drone over my crops. Each time I approached them, I got the same entitled attitude about how they weren't hurting anything, and I should be more neighborly. Next, I decided to repair the old wire fence that marked the property boundary. It had been down in some places for years since the previous owners never caused any problems. I spent an entire weekend fixing it, stretching new wire, and making sure the line was crystal clear. A few days later, I found a section deliberately cut with wire cutters. That's when I knew these people were escalating things on purpose. The breaking point came about a month later when they decided to throw some kind of big party. I was coming back from town when I saw cars lined up along the road and heard loud music. I drove over to see what was going on and couldn't believe my eyes. They had set up a massive event tent, tables, chairs, and a portable sound system right in the middle of one of my mowed pasture areas where I graze cattle. We're talking maybe an acre of my land being used for their party. There had to be 30 people there, kids running around, dogs off leash again, the whole 9 yards. I parked the truck and walked over to where the wife was holding court near the tent. I told her as calmly as I could that she had 1 hour to move everything back onto her own property before I called the authorities. I explained that this was way over the line and I'd had enough of the trespassing. She actually laughed in my face, told me to get lost and stop trying to ruin her party. Then she pulled out her phone and said she was calling the police herself to report that her unhinged neighbor was threatening her and her guests. I just stood there and waited. About 20 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy pulled up. The wife immediately launched into this dramatic performance, practically crying about how she feared for her safety and how I was trying to bully her off land she was entitled to enjoy. She went on about how unreasonable I was being and how they were just trying to have a nice family gathering. The deputy listened to her whole speech, then turned to me and asked for my side. I stayed calm and professional, explained the history of repeated trespassing, the torn down signs, the cut fence, and how I'd asked them multiple times to stay on their own property. Then the deputy asked the key question: where exactly was the property line? The wife waved her hand vaguely toward the general area and said it was around there somewhere, but what did it matter since I had hundreds of acres anyway? That's when I knew I had them. I told the deputy to hang on a second and went back to my truck. I grabbed my folder with the official land survey documents, the plat map, and the property tax records. I laid everything out on the hood of his cruiser and showed him exactly where the boundaries were. I looked the officer right in the eye and said as calmly as I could manage, "Officer, I own every acre. From that fence post right there all the way to that line of trees by the creek. This is my place of business, and these people are trespassing." The deputy studied the documents for a few minutes, nodded, and then turned to the wife. He informed her that she and her entire party were trespassing on private property. He told her that if everything wasn't moved back to her own land within 30 minutes, she'd be cited, and her guests could be too. You should have seen her face. She went from smug and entitled to completely humiliated in about 2 seconds. All her party guests were staring at her while she had to admit she'd been wrong the whole time. They packed up that party faster than I've ever seen anything moved. As the deputy was getting ready to leave, he came over to apologize for the trouble. He told me that as long as my property was zoned for agriculture, which it was, I was permitted to conduct all normal farming operations. He said there was nothing the neighbors could do about the normal sights, sounds, and smells of a working farm. That's when the light bulb went off in my head. See, these city folks had moved out here for the view. They'd positioned their fancy house specifically to look out over my pretty fields and forest. But they seem to forget that a view isn't something you own unless you buy the land that creates it. I decided it was time for some agricultural improvements right along our shared border. Phase 1 started the very next week. I fired up my tractor and started hauling dozens of large round hay bales from the back 40. I stacked them neatly along the entire property line, creating a solid wall about 15 feet high. It was perfectly legal, just feed storage for the cattle. But it completely blocked their precious view of my fields. The wife came storming over the day I finished, demanding to know what I thought I was doing. I explained that I was storing winter feed for my livestock, which was a normal farming operation. She threatened to call the county, so I told her to go right ahead. Phase 2 began about a week later. Behind my new hay wall, I started what I called an organic composting operation. This was actually something I'd been planning anyway for my organic certification, but the location and timing were specifically chosen for maximum impact. I got all the proper permits and started trucking in organic materials to create nutrient-rich fertilizer. Chicken manure from a local poultry farm, fish scraps from a cannery, and literal tons of spoiled cabbage from a wholesale market. All perfectly legal and agriculturally sound, but the smell was absolutely overwhelming, especially when the wind blew toward their house. Phase 3 was the cherry on top. I established an apiary with 20 beehives right in front of the compost area. The bees were essential for pollinating my crops, and I made sure everyone knew it with big official signs every 10 feet that read, "Danger, active apiary, authorized personnel only, risk of severe allergic reaction." The neighbors went absolutely ballistic. They could no longer see their view. Their backyard was unusable because of the smell, and they were terrified of the bees. The wife started calling every authority she could think of: zoning, health department, animal control, you name it. Each time someone came out to investigate, I calmly showed them my permits, explained the legitimate agricultural purposes of everything, and demonstrated that I was in full compliance with all regulations. The officials would look around, take some notes, and tell the neighbors there was nothing they could do since it was a legal farming operation on agricultural land. Their complaints got more and more desperate. They tried to claim the smell was a health hazard, that the bees were dangerous, that I was deliberately harassing them. But every inspection came back the same way. Everything I was doing was completely legal and appropriate for a working farm. Within a few months, their social life had completely dried up. Nobody wanted to visit a house where you couldn't sit outside because of the smell and the bees. I heard through the grapevine that their property value had taken a nosedive too. About 6 months into my agricultural improvement project, they came over for what I guess was a final attempt at negotiation. Both of them, looking pretty beaten down, knocked on my door one evening. They offered what sounded like a genuine apology for all the trespassing and promised they would never set foot on my land again if I would just move the compost pile and the beehives. I listened to their whole speech, then politely declined. I explained that the composting project was on a strict one-year cycle to meet organic certification standards, and the bees had become essential for my farm's ecosystem. I told them I'd invested too much time and money to stop now, but I was glad to hear they'd finally decided to respect property boundaries. The look on their faces was something I'll never forget. About 8 months later, I saw a for sale sign go up in their yard. I later heard from a local realtor that they'd had to sell their dream house for a massive loss because no buyer wanted to live next to a 15-foot wall of hay, a foul-smelling compost operation, and an active bee colony. But here's the really satisfying part. My malicious compliance paid off in ways I never expected. That compost created the best fertilizer I've ever used. My organic crops had a record-breaking harvest that year, and the profit more than covered all my investment costs. The bees improved pollination across my entire farm, increasing yields on everything, and my privacy was completely restored. The new owners who bought the place are actually farmers themselves. They understood exactly what they were getting into when they bought a house next to a working farm. We've never had a single problem, and they even buy hay from me sometimes. I was out checking the fence line the other day and saw that all my agricultural improvements are still going strong. The hay wall has been restacked a few times as I've used bales for feed, but I always make sure to keep it well maintained. The compost operation has become a permanent part of my organic program, and those bees are still some of the most productive hives in the county. Looking back, I think the funniest part is that the original neighbors bought their house specifically for the view, but seemed to forget the view wasn't included in the deed. They thought they could just help themselves to my land because it looked pretty, but they learned the hard way that property rights actually mean something. In the end, the only thing they had a clear view of was the direct consequence of their own entitlement, stacked 15 feet high and smelling of justice. The whole experience taught me something important about dealing with entitled people. Sometimes being polite and reasonable isn't enough. Sometimes you have to use their own tactics against them, but do it completely legally and legitimately. They wanted to enjoy the benefits of living next to a farm without respecting that it was actually a working farm, so I just gave them the full farming experience, sight, smell, and sound included. Update. 2 years later, I thought this story was over, but apparently the universe had one more twist in store for me. About 6 months ago, I got a call from my lawyer with some interesting news. Remember how the original neighbors had to sell at a loss? Well, it turns out they tried to sue me after they moved away. My lawyer said they filed a claim alleging that I had deliberately created a nuisance to force them out and damage their property value. They were seeking damages for their financial loss on the house sale. I'll be honest, I was worried at first. Even though everything I did was legal, the thought of a lengthy court battle wasn't appealing. But my lawyer reviewed all the documentation I'd kept, photos of the trespassing, copies of the permits, records of all my complaints to the sheriff, and told me not to sweat it. The case got thrown out faster than a rotten tomato. The judge ruled that all my farming operations were legitimate agricultural activities protected under state right-to-farm laws. He noted that the neighbors had been repeatedly warned about trespassing and had chosen to ignore property boundaries. The judge actually commented that if they wanted a guaranteed view, they should have bought the land that provided it. But here's the kicker. Since their lawsuit was deemed frivolous, I was awarded attorney fees. They ended up paying my legal costs on top of everything else. My lawyer told me something interesting during all this. Apparently, this kind of thing is becoming more common as city people move to rural areas without understanding what farm life actually involves. He said I handled it exactly right by documenting everything and staying within the law. The really satisfying part came a few months later when I ran into the wife at the feed store in town. She was there with what I assumed was her sister, and they were talking loudly about how unfair their whole situation had been. She spotted me across the store and went quiet immediately. As I was checking out, I heard her sister asking why she suddenly got so quiet. The wife told her that was the farmer who ruined their dream house. Her sister asked what happened, and I couldn't help but overhear the wife's version of events. According to her story, I was a vindictive neighbor who deliberately sabotaged their property out of pure spite. She claimed they were just trying to enjoy the natural beauty of the area, and I retaliated by creating health hazards and environmental problems. She completely left out the part about repeatedly trespassing, cutting my fence, and hosting parties on my land. Her sister listened to the whole sob story, then asked the obvious question, why didn't they just stay on their own property in the first place? The wife got flustered and started talking about how 2 acres wasn't enough space and how unreasonable property lines were in rural areas. I finished my purchase and headed for the door, but I couldn't resist stopping by their aisle on the way out. I politely said hello and asked how they were settling into their new place. The wife turned red and mumbled something about doing fine. Her sister looked confused by the tension. As I walked away, I heard the sister start asking more pointed questions about exactly what had happened. Something tells me the wife was about to get a reality check from her own family. The best part of this whole update, though, is what's happened with my farm. That organic certification I was working toward finally came through last year, and it's been incredibly profitable. The premium prices for organic crops more than justified all the investment and hassle. The composting operation has become so successful that I'm now selling excess organic fertilizer to other farms in the area. The beehives have multiplied, and I've started a small side business selling honey at the farmer's market. What started as malicious compliance has turned into legitimate additional income streams. The new neighbors who bought the house have become genuinely good friends. They're a younger couple who actually grew up on farms and moved here to start their own small agricultural operation. They've rented a few acres from me to grow specialty vegetables for local restaurants, and we've talked about partnering on some projects. Last month, they invited me over for a barbecue, and we all had a good laugh about my hay wall fortress. They've actually kept it up as a windbreak for their garden, so it's serving a legitimate purpose now. The husband joked that it came with the house as a premium privacy feature. The county extension agent has been out a few times to document my transition to organic farming as a case study for other farmers. He was particularly interested in the composting operation and the integrated pest management using the bees. Apparently, I'm now considered something of a local expert on sustainable farming practices. One thing that really drives home how much things have changed. Last fall during harvest season, the new neighbors helped me bring in my crops. We were working late into the evening, and as we finished loading the last trailer, the husband pointed toward where the old hay wall used to block the view. He said he finally understood why the previous owners were so obsessed with the view. The sunset over the fields really was spectacular. But then he added that watching crops grow and participating in the harvest was way better than just looking at pretty scenery. That really summed it up perfectly. The original neighbors wanted all the Instagram-worthy benefits of rural life without any of the reality. They thought they could just take what they wanted and ignore the actual work and respect that farming requires. The new neighbors understand that living next to a working farm means you're part of an agricultural community. They respect the land, understand the work involved, and contribute rather than just consume. I still keep all the documentation from the original incident in a file folder just in case, but honestly, I doubt I'll ever need it again. Word has gotten around the local farming community about what happened, and I think it served as a cautionary tale for other property disputes. My lawyer told me he's actually referred several other farmers to my case as an example of how to handle similar situations. Stay within the law, document everything, and use legitimate business operations to protect your rights. The whole experience changed how I think about my farm, too. I used to see it just as the family business, but now I understand it's also a way of life that needs to be protected. Those 300 acres aren't just crops and livestock, they're a heritage and a responsibility. And if anyone else ever decides they want to help themselves to my land, well, let's just say, I've got plenty more agricultural improvements I could implement. The bees are always looking for new places to expand, and I've been thinking about adding some heritage breed pigs to the operation. I hear they can be quite vocal, especially around feeding time. But for now, things are peaceful. The crops are growing, the bees are buzzing, and my property lines are respected. Sometimes the best revenge really is just living well and farming better. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I have a story that started before the COVID pandemic and just concluded a while back. Obligatory first-time poster in English is my third language, so forgive any errors I may make in my use of words. I am a typical simple guy who just likes relaxing and was born with the proverbial silver spoon in my mouth. I am the black sheep of my family, and a middle child to boot, double whammy, but I at least have a little brains and some luck, which I kind of use on a day-to-day basis. Due to my parents' connections, I managed to get into lucrative schools in my country, did my military service and was promoted upward to captain, and later on was shipped off to college out of country. I've never been too close with many people apart from my circle of friends, and I prefer it that way. After my college, I was employed in government, you guessed it, family connections, and after a few years was able to use my name to get ahead and meet people who helped me set up several businesses in my area, a coastal city, where this story happens. The money I used was generally allowances, small inheritance from my late grandma, some investments, a fund that was started when I was a baby, and money gifted to me by family, basically an attempt not leave me broke enough to embarrass them, even though I'm a simple, low-maintenance fellow LOL. My businesses are booming since the coastal area we live in attracts a lot of tourists, local and international, and of course some locals who wish to mingle with the tourists to get green cards, pen pals, spouses, and such. Typical coastal city, I guess. The incident. As a proprietor of my businesses, I have most, if not all, of my staff on salary since it's the best way for them to gain benefits and is easier for me as a business owner tax-wise. Tipping is more of a gift typically since we do not have a tipping culture. And I have my staff on comprehensive medical insurance, which has additional dental and optical on top of the National Governmental Healthcare Medical Scheme. Our government hospitals provide all services free, but wait times for elective surgeries are exhausting. We also have a mandatory legal requirement to provide employees with retirement benefit savings, minimum of 21 working days leave, I give 30, and my businesses offer paid overtime, unhindered medical leave for surgery and serious conditions which can be extended, as well as allowances to seek treatment such as chemo or dialysis. One of my female employees, an older lady who is brilliant and had moved up the ranks to manager and was adored by all, was booked for a hysterectomy since, as she told me, she was at risk of cervical cancer as her mother had passed from it a few years back, and since she already had 4 kids, it was the most logical step. She did her due diligence and found a private hospital which was in our system where she could have the procedure done. On the planned date, she applied for leave days, which we obviously rejected since this fell under the scope of medical leave. She went on to have the procedure successfully and had a quick recovery time. The bill was to be catered for by the company insurance, and we had made sure to get all the necessary pre-authorizations. A few months later, she came to work looking distraught, and in all honesty, we thought that she had been told that she had gotten cancer since she had asked for a day off to go for review and tests, but what happened was much worse. She had been given a bill by the hospital since the insurance had refused to pay for it, citing that it was not in the scope of cover. We were livid since we had made sure everything was in effing order. I sent my accounts manager to go have a talk with the insurance people as we tried to calm her down. The manager came back super angry and told me that basically after showing them the evidence, the insurance people just told him to buzz off. I decided to personally go visit that office and get a clear understanding of what was happening. They kept me waiting for an hour, and even after that had the audacity to inform me the director from the head office, who was in the area, had declined to meet me because he was quote-unquote busy. I was pissed to the high heavens, so I decided to go to their head office in the capital city, a 2-hour flight. The head office was no help and informed me that they had revised their policy and that it was not covered. I asked when the policy was revised. They informed me a month prior. I informed them the surgery was done 5 months prior and we had all the documentations. They claimed that it was 12 months retrospective. I inquired why I was not informed of it since this was big news, and I have held policies with them, and they told me that they had informed their large clients and would inform the other clients when their insurances were due for renewal. I demanded to speak to their boss, company vice president, since the CEO was not around, and they boldly told me he had no time for me, and frankly that in verbatim, "We are a large company and have no time to argue semantics with low-end clients. If you don't like it, you can frankly leave and find a new insurance company." The revenge. If I had been initially pissed, I was full-blown mad. I was livid and filled with rage. In all my years, I may have experienced some disrespect, and I accepted it not to make problems, but this time it went too far. I decided in the heat of the moment to switch everything and be done with them. I flew back home and just plain went to the hospital and settled the bill in full and took the receipt to my employee, who initially insisted that she would do anything to pay me back, but I refused since it was no way her fault, and I'll be damned if she pays for something that was way out of her control. I had a few days to cool down and talked with my directors. The words still etched on my mind. I asked how long it would take us to switch to another insurance. They went ahead and checked out a few large rivals of the insurance we had and discovered that if we switched, it would take 6 months for the new insurance to provide full coverage. The firm we picked, who I'll call New Insurance, offered us a way better deal to the one we had, and not only comprehensive cover, dental and optical. They also included mental health cover, physiotherapy and occupational therapy cover, rehabilitative services, mobility device acquisition, prosthetics and wheelchairs for some of the disabled employees, smart cards for direct payment on outpatient visits, kind of like a debit card, and a dedicated team of relationship managers, death and funeral benefits, and an expanded coverage area, plus up to 6 dependents plus spouse cover. It would cost me a little more, but I didn't really care. The people who dealt with us from our previous insurance, who I'll call Old Insurance, seemed unfazed that I was pulling my company from them since they thought it was just a small business. They looked puzzled when I came in with several people and a few boxes of documents. What they failed to realize was that apart from that one business, which is a restaurant, I have 3 popular bars, a cab company, a hotel resort, cleaning service chain, a building and residential guard service, and several rental buildings in the town and around the country. Their shock was compounded when they were informed by the lawyer just who I am, and the shock, awe, confusion, and panic when they heard my family name was an extremely satisfying sight. Cue the pleading and attempted negotiations and apologies. It was so big that the news reached their head office, who sent not only their director, the one who was apparently too big to see me, but also their chief legal officer, chief financial officer, and president of the company. I somehow also earned a personalized call from their CEO, who was abroad. No amount of sweet-talking was changing my mind, and by the end of 6 weeks, we had completely removed ourselves from the old insurance. It was now a waiting game to the beginning of the new insurance cover, and we really hoped that no one would become unwell by that time, but we were ready just in case. In that waiting time and after the new insurance commenced, I talked to my friends and my family on one of my holiday visits. My older brother's kids adore me, and my family kind of realized they were a-holes to me and are trying to re-enter my life, and thought that was that. Aftermath. My friends and family took my words and also pulled their businesses from the insurance to other insurances. The company took such a huge hit, and when COVID came around and was a big deal, they were barely floating. They went into receivership soon after and were acquired by the insurance I had moved to, who happened to be their greatest rivals. The directors and CEO were given their golden parachutes and resigned, and most of their employees were luckily retained apart from the senior executives, including the ones who told my manager to buzz off. In a cruel twist of irony, the building they were operating on in our town was sold, and if you guessed I purchased it, you would be absolutely correct. I decided to remodel the inside and turn it to a business rental space. All in all, it was a bit of a sweet payback, and wherever they are, I hope those disrespectful guys learned that everyone is human and they are not above anyone, and remember that karma is a cold and heartless witch. Edit to add. My goodness, this post has blown up. I have gotten some awards and am grateful for it. Some of your comments have me silently chuckling to myself. I'm happy I made your day and hope you get bosses who understand, or you become an understanding boss yourself. In my post, I realized I said that my employee applied for leave which we rejected since it fell under the scope of medical leave. What I meant was I rejected her request for normal leave days since I wanted her to utilize the unhindered medical leave days since I did not know how long recovery would take, and I wanted her to keep earning her salary even as she rested. As for my English, I was sent to an English-speaking country for college, where my limited English was expanded, and it's my third language with me counting the 2 local languages I know. Thank you again and have a great day, afternoon, morning, or night, depending on where you are from. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I send 2 reports to our biggest client every week. One I send Tuesday and again on Friday. This is the open order report. Every order we are currently fulfilling. The second I send on Monday. It's the report for what orders we have shipped the previous week. This gives the customer a full image of open and closed orders. Mind you, I specifically requested that the tool to generate the second report be created. Sending the report and the creation of the tool used to send it were both my idea. In my one on the 18th, I explained to my manager that I need to send the second report on Monday because the information is not updated in our software in a timely manner on Friday. So sending it on the Monday of the following week ensures everything is current. The tool has an option to select which dates are reflected in the report. So today, Monday 6/30, I would select the dates for last week, 6/23, 6/27. My manager misunderstood and thought that if I send the report on Monday, it would include that Monday and 4 days of the previous week, Tuesday, Friday. He sent me an email on the 26th saying he did not like this solution and found it confusing. He said, "Effective immediately, we would need to adjust my hours to extend to when billing is complete, which is around 4:30 p.m. I work till 4. I absolutely don't mind staying to do the job I'm paid for, but I knew that due to the delay in updating, the shipping report would not be current. I also knew it would reflect 5 days of the same week and not 1 day of the current week and 4 days of the previous week. I went to his office to clear this up, and I said 2 words before he interrupted me in a raised voice. "I don't care. I want the report sent on Friday." I immediately said, "Okay, manager," and went to leave, but he continued going off. I said something else and he shut me down again. "You need to send the report on Friday. End of discussion." "Okay, manager." Cue malicious compliance. The next day, I stay later, refreshing the report that I know is not going to update. I generate it and see that Friday's shipments are missing. I send it as instructed and leave. Shortly after, he emails saying the report is not complete and I need to send one Monday morning. I don't work on the weekend, so I just saw it this morning. I tell him that I have one tool to get this done and there is a delay in the system and tell him this is why I suggested sending on Mondays. I ask him if there is another tool or method I am unaware of. I tell him the invoicing report and the shipping report don't match. He says, "That's the problem. You sent the report without looking at it." I let him know I did look at it, but I did what I was instructed to do. Now we look even more unorganized and inconsistent to our biggest customer. He says the information should be available on Fridays, and he asked a higher up for details on when the report updates. That higher up said that the report doesn't update until 4:30 p.m. to 5:15 p.m. when everyone is gone. Most recent correspondence, FYI. We can talk about when we want to send the report. Anyway, thank you for watching.